Welcome to the Utility Security Podcast, your command center for all things utility security. From power plant warriors to grid guardians and even curious citizens, this podcast is your essential briefing on keeping up to date with knowledge and insights for securing our nation's utilities. Expert intel through interviews with security chiefs, tech wizards, and policy shapers. Tune in as we explore the latest vulnerabilities, industry best practices, and inspiring stories of resilience from the frontline heroes keeping our grids secure.
Welcome, Matthew. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself and your role at CISA?
Sure. So I'm Matthew Rogers. Background-wise, I'm one of those IT to OT people. So most relevant for this group, I spent 3 years as a tech lead and as a founding engineer at a startup for bolting cybersecurity into a lot of these legacy networks. I have a PhD in the even more niche area of like adding security into legacy serial data bus networks. So I was trying to take your old serial Modbus, DMP3, or I mostly focused on the transportation sector. So a lot of CAN bus, mill standard 1553, like freight rail, avionics, computers, that sort of thing. And so I spent a lot of time trying to add cybersecurity in after the fact through continuous monitoring and building detection systems and stuff like that. So you might see a through line here. It was expensive. I spent a lot of time, both through grad school and PhD and then through work, kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to get cybersecurity into these systems. And so now at CISA, I lead the Secure by Design team for operational technology. And so trying to ask the question, how can we make a lot of these OT components more secure by design? How do we ensure some of those basic cybersecurity functionalities exist from the offset so that, when past Matt is trying to bolt in a legacy solution to try and fix a serial connection and add authentication after the fact, I don't have to do that. So I do that work. And then I also lead a lot of our ICS sort of research and development work here. So kind of understanding how we can transition some of those early stage research projects and ideally make them open source so that security becomes a bit more accessible for the everyday utility professional.
Okay. Well, that leads into my next question, which is all about, where we're talking today because CISA just announced their Secure by Design Pledge initiative, which I think is a super exciting step forward for the industry. So if you could tell us more about that process and how you got it to move forward and, what sort of inspired everything and the key goals you're looking to achieve.
Yeah. So, the inspiration for the first bit, the Secure by Design piece, a lot of that came out of some articles that our leadership wrote back in like February of 2023, talking about how, this Foreign Affairs article entitled "Stop Passing the Buck on Cybersecurity." So, it's one of those things like cybersecurity is this like global, like multi-billion-dollar industry. But at the same time, we keep seeing the same problems over and over again. The scale keeps continuing to increase for threats. But as people in the utility space will really understand and feel to their heart, we don't really have the workforce and necessarily the ability to scale out and have the cybersecurity continue to basically keep paying that bill over and over again from the defensive side, particularly at the end customer. There's only so much you can do once a product is given to you to actually secure it, right? Like, it came from a monitoring space. There's only so many mitigating controls you can do before something inevitably gets through, right? And so how do we make it more secure by design and make it so that you have to patch less? Security is much less expensive for the end user. So, that's the hope for the initiative. Like, how can we make cybersecurity scale better? And then from the pledge piece, it was really saying, secure by design is a really long form initiative by its entire conception, right? It's removing things like classes of vulnerabilities, removing like memory safety issues from products in the first place. Like, that will take time. It can't snap my fingers and, not that reprogramming everything in Rust would solve it, but it would make it better. I can't do that overnight. And so these are, from the pledge's perspective, it's a lot of top concrete actions informed by the threat landscape that CISA is seeing that we believe they'll actually meaningfully drive better security for our nation going forward, both in the short term. A lot of the pledge's goals are saying like, you will do X within the next year, as well as in the long term, because they line up and cater to the kind of larger Secure by Design initiative where we want to head for these more secure products.
Okay. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about the threats and why these efforts are needed to keep pushing Secure by Design forward. The headlines are kind of been filled lately with stories of a lot of issues of hacking going on with our utilities. So can you talk more about the threats that are out there and how these efforts are helping neutralize those?
Yeah, I mean, we can point to a lot of the incidents over the last 6 months that are driving it. Just in the OT space alone, right? I mean, we had the Cyber Avengers group hacking internet-exposed PLCs and HMIs to Russian hacktivists, basically doing the same thing to different water utilities. It's an indication that a lot of these, criminal or state-affiliated actors are, starting to pick on the small guys, trying to get the low-hanging fruit, the stuff you can scan out on Shodan and see, right? A lot of these cases, it was almost certainly a default password and connected to the open internet. Like, is that good cyber hygiene? No. And should a lot of the utilities be investing more money into cybersecurity perspective to make sure things like that don't happen? Sure, but at the same time, it really shouldn't be as hard as it is to actually have that level of basic cyber hygiene. So a lot of this security design effort, one of the items in the pledge, and we can talk more into the elements here later, but one of the elements is just not having default passwords anymore, removing that as an option. Because, it's not that the utility security professionals can't change a password, right? It's that, particularly over like a distributed control system, or any sort of distributed resource environment, you're deploying a lot of product. And so how do you make it so it is far harder to make a mistake? Or, you're not deploying it, an integrator is deploying it. And so how do you make it so it is way harder or impossible in this case with default passwords for you to make a mistake? Like you have to set the password when you're setting up the device, or it's going to be unique per device so that even if it's exposed to the open internet, it's not some thing that they can just brute force super easily. It's little security solutions like this that really drive down risk, don't really cause a lot of problems from the manufacturer end, kind of work into the existing workflows for the asset owner, but don't cost any money really. It's just things that you can just have better secure by default. That's really what we're going for.
So you talk, and then, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add on the both delay. I was just going to add on the critical infrastructure piece as well. Talking to the pledge, particularly to the utilities. It's interesting in our initial conception of the pledge and how it is out now. Pledges are a very interesting way of framing things. A lot of this is voluntary. CISA isn't going to regulate. We don't have a stick to say you have to sign the pledge. We hope that there's a lot of market drivers that will improve this, but this is why the items that we're focusing on are very auditable. They're things that you can easily monitor. You can look. We're telling these companies, hey, improve your multi-factor authentication uptick, but do that by creating a little blog post that says, we've seen an uptake in usage, and sharing the statistics that only that company has and putting that out to the world. So I think a lot of the critical infrastructure players will inherently benefit from that, but the initial pledge is focused on software and IT companies. We're in the process of talking through basically making a secure design pledge for OT. I think the driving complication for why that pledge isn't scoped to the entirety of all software from the offset is doing a pledge, we want to make sure we do it right. So let's scope things down in the first pass. But also there's a very interesting complication to security for all of these utilities and ICS, OT, whatever word you want to use, in that from a greenfield perspective, if I am deploying a new, clean energy renewable source, the amount of backwards compatibility and legacy cybersecurity issues that I have, that might be pretty minimal. You can set yourself up for success there. And so we don't want to accidentally, in a world where we are dealing with the very real operational concerns of the existing legacy environments, but using that as an excuse to not do better in the greenfield environments, right? So we're trying to find the right balance of how do we do that. Now, to the listeners here, right? If you want to go and waive this secure by design pledge in whatever OEMs and their face during an RFI process and say, we want you to meet these, there's nothing stopping you from doing so, and there's nothing stopping those companies from signing up. But we are trying to tackle that problem going forward, and you expect to hear more about this in the next couple of months, of how we can tackle the brownfield versus greenfield issue for security expectations from OEMs.
Okay. You kind of mentioned a little bit the default password thing and multi-factor authentication. Maybe go into more details about what's in that pledge, some of the other areas that it's covering.
Sure. So there's 7 elements of the pledge. Increasing the use of multi-factor authentication, reducing default passwords, reducing classes of vulnerabilities. That means things like memory safety, like authentication issues. So instead of a CVE, the CWE, the common weakness enumeration, part of this is going to one of the later elements, like a publishing a vulnerability disclosure policy. People need, and demonstrating transparency and vulnerability reporting. People need to understand, like, what kind of vulnerabilities am I seeing over and over again? The real driver for things like reducing entire classes of vulnerabilities is we've seen over and over again that, well, yes, it's a memory safety issue again and again and again. And it's not that you necessarily did a terrible job patching it the first time. It's that we found that a lot of companies are playing whack-a-mole, basically going one vulnerability to another, when you can solve the class of vulnerability by taking a sprint, actually setting back, going like, how am I programming in such a way that this class of vulnerability is occurring across my entire code base? And how can we change our development environment to completely cut it out, right? Following things like secure software development framework, those sorts of best practices. So we're trying to encourage people to follow that as much as possible. Also, like increasing the installation of security patches by customers. This is a really tricky one in the utility space. Patch rates are not high in utilities. Part of that is downtime concerns, which are very real. And like also, I'm sure the utility security folks can empathize, right? Like getting the relationships between the like classical cybersecurity people and then the asset owners and operators on the ground, such that you can take the time and schedule those security patches. That's like a really difficult communications interpersonal problem, right? Like it's difficult to produce guidance at scale here. We'll joke about like hosting a pizza party or something along those lines, but trying to drive that culture change at scale is difficult. And that's where we want to get to. But from the security patches angle, it's a lot of focusing on the most critical things. So we have things at CISA, we have a program called KEV, known exploited vulnerabilities. So these are things that we've actively seen being exploited out in the wild. They're no longer a hypothetical CVE that some researcher has found. It is being exploited by a threat actor. So trying to increase the patch rates on things like that, as well as I think the only one I didn't hit on here is increasing the ability for customers to actually gather evidence of intrusion into their network. So evidence of intrusion, you might have seen something similar in earlier secure by design documents on sort of logging in the baseline version of a product. Another really interesting piece from an OT perspective, logging on a lot of these industrial automation controllers, not really a thing. And so how do we make it so that some basic evidence of intrusion exists? You can tie this into some sort of safety argument as well, right? How do you make it so that if an attacker comes in, they're able to get down to that OT network? How do you know that they're not changing the engineering logic? How do you know that they're not sending firmware updates? Yeah, I mean, there's a continuous monitoring angle here to try and track any of this, but there's also no logging in default in the product, right? It all requires bolt-on cybersecurity solutions to try and find this evidence right now. How do we make it so that evidence is built in so that, throughout the life cycle of a cyber incident, from all of the preparatory work you want to do, so things like, default passwords, multi-factor authentication, which are helping you prevent the incident in the first place, but also from an incident response perspective, all the way down at evidence of intrusion, how do we make sure that incident responders have the tools they need to either A, declare the incident from an operator perspective, but B, actually make a meaningful triage of what the problem is so they can actually go and fix it. Like right now, that's all going to be guesswork without any real evidence of intrusion. So, the pledge doesn't have, notably, we're not saying how to do it. We give some suggestions. We lay out some possible ways of going about these solutions, but it's really about the end goal. So we picked all these pledge items because they're auditable. It's something that a security company can show metrics about and prove to their customers. And, our hope from this is that, the industry, the groups that are signing onto the pledge can basically wave that around and say, hey, like we are meeting the metrics. We're taking your customer security seriously. And that can be a driver from the demand side and the customer end to say like, hey, look, like this company takes my security seriously. That means that my security organization is going to be less expensive overall. I might have to patch less. The security functionality I want will exist. And I know over time that they're going to keep driving down risk for their products. So I won't have to invest a ton of money down the road on all of these mitigating controls, all of these, security products and things like that, because I can trust that I have a secure product. That's the goal, right? So we're trying to have the demand side and all of that increase based off the secure by design pledge, But from the OEM side, they can get the good publicity. This is their sort of incentive to sign on, to say like, no, we're taking your security seriously. Like, please pay attention, and this is how we're going to show it. Now, of course, there's like the national security reasons and the safety reasons. Like, you really hope these companies were taking your safety and security seriously before. But this is just a way to publicly show that.
You're kind of bringing up that interaction with manufacturers. Can you talk a little bit more about how that, as you built this initiative out, how was like working with them? How did that relationship work as you're building out this pledge?
So for this pledge, the vast majority of it was coordinating with the IT Sector Coordinating Council over the course of about 5 months, up to the lead up where we published this pledge at RSA this last year. And so, the working group was really committed to getting to yes. And so, it really helped us get through any more tactical disagreements. And so I think really the manufacturers were bought in that this was a real thing that they need to work on and that they're serious about. It's just a balance of like, what does that pledge look like? What does a year look like? What are the goals that we can reasonably achieve in that time frame, and that we can actually audit and feel comfortable as a company publishing externally, right? Because there's that privacy element as well. And I can speak more to the OT manufacturers piece. We're actively working on a secure by design document tailored to OT. And so we've been speaking a lot with different OT manufacturers about, how to shape it, what security controls are important. This particular document is something we're starting called the Secure by Demand series, which is basically pointing the utility security people in this case to a set of security controls and considerations that will allow them to have a pretty strong cybersecurity foundation and a flexible cybersecurity foundation. Because the number one thing we always hear from asset owners is, hey, we're concerned, there's a big push for cybersecurity. If I buy a bunch of products right now, so our security professionals in 10 years going to look at me and say, hey, you have legacy components, right? We need to get to a world where the foundation of equipment that you're purchasing can actually support like a proper security foundation that you can build on. Now, that's difficult if we're still existing in this 20 to 30 year acquisition cycle in OT. Like, that's a difficult foundation to set up, but we need to actually prioritize the security elements for things like identity and authentication, without which it's pretty difficult to actually have any sort of trust in a network. So, when we're working with the OT manufacturers on this piece and talk to them about, what considerations should we prioritize? Why aren't you doing this right now? A lot of the times they actually welcome some of this guidance. So the product security folks that we talk to at the OEMs, it's not that the product security people at one of these companies doesn't want to do cybersecurity. It's that historically, these customers, they've been serving utilities for decades now. And so a lot of their foundation from a culture as a company is focused on safety and process controls and delivering those extra functionalities. And security, and we see this time and time again, not just in the OT sector, but in every sector, the drivers to market often encourage speed, and that often comes at the cost of cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity is fundamentally a trade-off. It costs money to do. You have to make that decision as a company to prioritize cybersecurity. We're seeing more and more companies decide and realize that they need to make that trade-off. That's part of what the Secure by Design effort is really driving towards. But from the OT side, those product security people, like when we're putting out this guidance, we're hoping that the product security people can take things like the Secure by Design effort and use that to show to their CEOs, to their CFOs, to make that business justification for why cybersecurity is important and why they should prioritize it. And also so that they can unify the demand signal a bit more, right? Like, even if you're a big utility, it's hard for you to argue with one of the big players and actually change their product roadmap. And so we're hoping to help, but through interviews with asset owners, through talks with manufacturers, actually unify some of that demand signal so you can actually get some of these cybersecurity features, both from a drive of demand that really makes a clear economic signal, but also from the government through efforts like Secure by Design, telling these companies like, no, this is important and we take this seriously. And then, of course, there's like the third element here of all of the threat-based reporting that we're sending out to say like, no, these threats are real. Critical infrastructure cybersecurity is important. You really need to be taking this seriously now.
And so, kind of looking at your website, you have 157 companies who have signed on to this pledge. If you're a utility kind of out there looking to to invest in cybersecurity. How do you just go to the website to find out that these are pledge signers, these are companies that align, or is there other ways they would know that they're aligned with this initiative?
The best way for them to figure it out is definitely to go on the website and figure it out. So it's CISA.gov/secure-by-design/pledge, or if you just Google Secure by Design pledge, it will definitely pop up. And so checking that list, seeing what companies are on it, that'll give you a good idea. You can use that as you're considering what products you're looking at and kind of who is taking your security seriously. But also, like, if you're aware of the pledge and you're working with partners and they haven't signed the pledge, it might not be they don't want to. It might be just a marketing and messaging thing, right? Like, I can't claim that CISA has reached every corner of industry. And so, we would encourage the utility security folks, like, take the pledge, show it to the companies you work with, see if they're willing to sign it, see what conversations they're willing to have with you about how they're taking your security seriously, because you can drive that conversation. And the more people that do it, the more collectively that you're going to be able to actually get some of these security features down the road.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Matt. Is there anywhere else on the website that folks should go if they want to learn more about Secure by Design, the stuff that's going on now, or maybe the future stuff that you've talked about as well?
Well, I just removed that /pledge from the URL. So CISA.gov/secure-by-design will get you to the landing page for all the resources. I would really encourage folks to read there's a white paper on there called Shifting the Balance of Cybersecurity. I think that will really give you a sense of the tangible examples that you can use when you're discussing this with your manufacturers, with your OEMs, heck, with your integrators and your vendor support contracts too, like trying to understand what Secure by Design looks like so you can really get a sense for where should this be something that I, as the asset owner or as the utility security group, like, what is my responsibility versus where can I offset some of that balance and really work with the manufacturer to ensure that my security is being taken care of. It's a hard conversation in at the best of times, but it's a hard conversation, particularly with critical infrastructure. A lot of the liability often will come down to the actual asset owner at the end of the day. So how do we make sure that those conversations with manufacturers are occurring? Because if they don't support the security products, the security functionalities, if they don't support kind of usability in a lot of the tools that they're doing, then it's going to be difficult for the asset owner to do much. So driving those needs is going to be really important so that cybersecurity gets more usable for you over time. Just keep an eye out for the website. We're going to be putting out more OT focused work in the future. And so you'll definitely be seeing that coming up.
Don't forget to visit our website at utilitysecurity.com for exclusive intel, resources, and a community of fellow utility security professionals. Stay safe, stay informed, and stay tuned for your next mission briefing.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss